Okay, everybody, let's get started. So, this is Psych 405. You're all in the right room. I'm in the right room. Okay, so I want to get a bit of a sense of what kind of class this is. So I'm going to do a few little polls. How many of you are psych students? I assume all of you. Okay, so I figured. How many of you have taken a philosophy class at some point? Okay, a handful, okay. How many of you have taken either Psych 303 or 304? Okay, none of you have taken that. Have any of you taken Psych 354, Foundations of Cognitive Science? I don't know if it's been offered recently. 2 of you. Okay, so if you've taken any of those, you will have a slight edge, but it looks like most of you have not, and that's okay. None of those things are prereqs. So my goal is to make sure that no one gets lost or falls behind. This content will be different from what many of you are used to, but I think it's the payoff at the end, I think, is worth it. And as you will see, when I teach, I try to break content down slowly and with lots of concrete examples. So that's the way I'll be guiding you all through it. Also video clips. I'm a firm believer in video clips. So a little bit about me and my background. So this class is Philosophical Issues in Psychology, which is, I'm very excited to teach this class because those are my 2 favorite topics. So my undergrad was in psychology. Then I did my master's in philosophy, and I'm now finishing my PhD in psychology here at the U of A. And given that it's philosophical issues in psychology, I want to start by saying a bit about what philosophy is. Now, if you get 3 philosophers in a room, they will not agree on anything. They will not even agree that there are 3 philosophers in the room. But this is my kind of working definition of philosophy. Philosophy is asking questions past the point at which it is normally appropriate to do so. So if you're in a science class, so let's say you're taking chemistry or something, and you ask, what is water? You'll get an answer. They'll tell you it's H2O, right? It's 2 parts hydrogen, 1 part oxygen. And if you ask what those things are, they'll tell you each of those things are elements that are defined in terms of how many protons the atoms have. And then if you keep asking, eventually you're going to get to quarks, and you ask, what are quarks? A chemist will say that's a unit of matter. But if you then ask, well, what is matter? What is stuff? At that point, you're going to be told to shut up. Stop asking questions and just do the math. In physics, there's a saying, shut up and calculate. What they may tell you to do is go to the philosophy department, right? If you keep asking that many questions, eventually it becomes the purview of philosophy. And so this class is going to take that kind of approach with psychology. So there are some questions that if you keep bugging your professors with, eventually you'll be told to shut up and or go to the philosophy department. So given that that's the approach we're taking, let's look at psychology. So can anyone tell me, what's the etymology of the term psychology? What are the terms that it's made up of mean? So what is psyche? What does psyche mean? Anyone know? I heard mind very vaguely, yes. So mind, soul, something like that. In the Greek, and then ology comes from the word logos, which roughly means, word or study of. So what psychology is it's the scientific study of the human mind and human behavior. So we're going to be asking questions past the point at which it's normally appropriate to do so. So this class divides into 2 parts. We're going to be asking, what is science? Right? Philosophy of science. Oh, okay, I don't want that. Just put it on for a second. And the second half will be philosophy of mind. So, what is the mind? Zoomed out, those are the 2 units of this course. And to give you a sense in a bit more detail about what the class will be about, I'm going to do a few more polls. These are kind of for fun. You don't have to raise your hand, but I would encourage you to, even if you lean just one way. So there's only 8 lectures in this class, and each lecture has like a main theme. So I'm going to see where your intuitions lie on the 8 main questions we'll be dealing with. So first question, should science only deal with only with observable entities, or should we include unobservable entities and theories? In other words, should science deal with only what we can directly observe, or should theories be allowed to include things that we can't see? So who thinks science should only deal with what we can directly observe? 2. Who thinks science, it's okay to include things that you cannot directly observe? Okay, so a pretty solid majority. So today we're going to be talking about a view called positivism. Hopefully we'll finish most of the chapter on positivism. So as a little teaser, positivism is the view that science should only deal with what is directly observable. So it's a very strict view of what science should be about. So that's what today is going to be about. Okay, next poll. Should science aim more at confirming theories or disconfirming theories? So confirming meaning proving them right, disconfirming meaning proving them wrong. Who thinks science should aim more at confirming theories? 3. Who thinks science should aim more at disconfirming theories? So on Friday, we'll be talking about the philosopher Karl Popper. He'll be a very important part of this course. Your paper will be partly about him. He argued that science should be about disconfirmation, or as he called it, falsification. He thought that science was a process of conjecture and refutation. So you make a guess, you make something up, and then you try to prove it wrong, and you hold on to the idea if it survives your attempts to prove it wrong. So that's Popper's view. And I'll just note in passing, he disagrees with the positivists. He does not think that science should only deal with what's directly observable. He thought it was perfectly legitimate to conjecture about things you can't directly see, as long as those theories lead to predictions about what you see. You don't need to worry about taking lots of notes right now. This is just kind of a zoomed out description of the kinds of questions we'll be talking about. Next question, should scientists be open-minded about everything, or should there be certain things that they are not allowed to question? Who thinks scientists should be open-minded about everything? Who thinks there should be certain things scientists should not be allowed to question? No one. Okay, so the next philosopher of science we'll be talking about, I guess it'll be next Wednesday, is Thomas Kuhn. And Kuhn argues that in fact there are some things that, in order for science to work, have to be kind of protected from criticism. A word that we'll be talking a lot about is the word paradigm. How many of you have heard the word paradigm? Okay, so a paradigm is kind of a guiding set of practices and assumptions that a scientific field has. And Kuhn says that in order for that to get off the ground, some things have to be shielded from criticism and just taken for granted. Popper thinks that that sometimes happens, but that it's bad. So your paper will be about the disagreement between Popper and Kuhn. That's what it's going to be about. You're going to be summarizing Popper's views and how they connect with psychology, and Kuhn's views and how they connect with psychology. Next, should scientists be trying to discover the truth? May seem obvious, but we'll see it won't be when we get to the chapter on scientific realism. Show of hands, who thinks science should be aiming at discovering the truth? Okay, who thinks no, the goal of science is not to discover the truth? Some hesitant hands. Good, so more disagreement than I thought there would be, but on that day, so next Friday, we'll be talking about scientific realism. So scientific realism is the view that, yes, the goal of science is to describe the way the world is, or the way reality is. By contrast, there are various forms of what we might call instrumentalism, where science is thought of not as something to discover the truth, but just a tool. It's a tool for making predictions about what you'll observe, but the goal is not to discover the true nature of the world. So that's a very important debate. We'll actually talk a little bit about it today because it relates to positivism a little bit. But that's what we're talking about that day. And on that day, we will also be talking about Bayes' theorem. So warning, there's a tiny bit of math in this class, just one equation. But trust me, it's a very beautiful equation. So don't be afraid. And we'll be going through that equation very carefully. Okay, so those are the main topics in the philosophy of science section. The second half of the class, as I say, is on philosophy of mind. So what is the mind? So the first question we'll be dealing with, do we have immaterial minds or souls? So, don't laugh. You never know. We'll be looking at arguments for that view. So the first view we'll be talking about is dualism, the view according to which there is both a biological component to the human person, so the body and brain, and an invisible soulish mind thing. So that's a dualism. There's two things. Who's willing to say they're a dualist? They think there's two aspects to the human person. So a few. Who thinks, no, it's just the brain and the body? So a lot of agnostics, I suppose. Not as many people answered that, but that's the first view we'll be talking about. So this goes back to René Descartes. The next topic is behaviorism. We'll be talking about behaviorism. I assume you all know what behaviorism is. Anyone not know? Actually, I don't want to ask anyone to embarrass themselves, but if you got this far, presumably at some point you've heard of behaviorism. So this is the view that psychology should only study behavior, not internal, unobservable mental processes. Is anyone a behaviorist? Does anyone think, yes, psychology should only study observable behavior? No. Who says, no, I am not a behaviorist? So that makes sense. So behaviorism is not very popular nowadays in psychology. We'll be talking both about psychological behaviorism, which is the version of behaviorism that you all have been exposed to, which is a research program where you don't study the mind, you just study behavior. We'll be talking a bit about that in the chapter, but we'll also be talking about philosophical behaviorism, which is the view not that the mind doesn't exist or can't be studied, that's what the psych behaviorists believe, people like Skinner and Watson. But philosophical behaviorism says the mind exists, the mind's perfectly real, but the mind is just a way of talking about behavior. To say that John loves Mary is just a way of saying he likes to give her flowers and stuff like that. It's just a roundabout way of talking about behavior. It may seem like a radical view, but it was very influential in the mid-20th century. Okay, the next question is one that I'm sure many of you have thought about in recent years. Could AI ever be conscious? So this relates to a view we'll be talking about in a couple of chapters actually, which is functionalism. Functionalism is the view that mental states are defined in terms of what they do, in terms of their function. And according to that view, AI could be conscious. But where are your intuitions at? Who thinks AI could be conscious? A machine could be. Maybe not one right now, but in the future. One maybe. Who thinks no, AI could not be conscious? So virtually everyone. Interesting. I thought it'd be a bit more divided, but okay, so interesting. Okay, last question. This one's a multi-part one. In the final chapters, we'll be talking about consciousness in more detail. This one's a multi-part question, as I say. So I'm going to go through a list of entities, starting with things with very big brains, and then moving down to smaller and smaller brains, and eventually to no brains. And what I want you all to do is raise your hand if you think this entity is conscious, and put your hand down where you think, no, this is not conscious anymore. So show of hands, who thinks humans are conscious? Presumably everyone. Keep your hand up if you think chimpanzees are conscious. Everyone. Dogs. Mice. So a couple people are unsure now. Lizards. Fish. Oh, interesting. I thought fish would be a little more controversial. Worms. Okay, a couple hands went down. Bacteria. Most of the hands went down. Okay, I'm going to bigger jump. Atoms. Do atoms have a little itty bit of consciousness? No one. Okay, I would have assumed so. But believe it or not, that is one view that is increasingly popular in philosophy. There's no view so crazy that at least one philosopher hasn't defended it. And so a view we'll be talking about in the final chapter is panpsychism, which is the view according to which all matter has like a little bit of consciousness. And I suspect most of you think that's crazy. I mean, none of you raised your hand for it. And it's not a view that I myself hold, but if you think about the hard problem of consciousness, it becomes a very tempting solution. So we'll be talking about why it's a tempting view for some. And one person who defends that view is David Chalmers. So David Chalmers is famous for talking about something called the hard problem of consciousness, which there's no reason to get into that right now, but he thinks panpsychism is a plausible solution to that. And another very important philosopher of mind who just recently passed away is Daniel Dennett, who advocates for a functionalist view. And you won't do a take-home paper for this, but as part of test 2, you'll be doing a paper sort of similar to the Popper versus Kuhn paper, where you will compare these two views. So there's one paper that's take-home that you do and submit printed with APA style, and one that you'll do in class as part of test 2. And both of them will be about debates between two important philosophers. And that is basically the course. So zoomed out, that's what we'll be covering. I want to make one disclaimer. So I've been thinking about these issues for a long time, and as may already be apparent, I have views about these debates. And I will sometimes say, oh, I don't agree with this, or here's why I'm sympathetic to this view. When I was an undergrad, I actually found those classes more interesting when the professor would say what they thought. But I want to be clear that the thinkers in this course that we'll be covering are not idiots, right? Even the views I disagree with, they are defensible. Maybe one or two people are idiots, but most of the people in the course are not idiots. So I will be doing my best to cover everyone fairly. And one thing that will help me be fair is that in many cases I used to have the opposite view. That's a goal I have in this course, is to be fair to all the different views. And additionally, I've never taught a fourth-year course before, so I don't know how much discussion or pushback there will be, but I'll just say I welcome pushback, questions, discussion, debate. That can make this class really interesting, so you should not be intimidated by the fact that I have views. Feel free to ask questions, raise objections. That could make the class very interesting. If at any point I have to stop the discussion and say, okay, no more questions for today, that means I'm very happy. That does not mean I'm cross with everyone. That means I think, okay, we had really good discussion today. But I may say, okay, we have to finish the content before the test, so I may cut it off, but if I ever have to do that, that means I'm very happy. Okay, so today, as it often is the case with first days, we're going to spend some time going through the course. This may take a while. There's a few different components to it, so this part's kind of dry, but I just want to get it all out of the way, including instructions on the paper. So this is E-Class. If you have not been on E-Class yet, you should do so. So this is important. So as I'll say later, if you have a question that pertains to anyone, you should be using this. You should only email me if it's a question that pertains specifically to you, but questions about content go there. This is the single most important document on E-Class. If you have not done so already, I encourage you to download this. As you'll see later, the test consists primarily of definitions and short answer. All of them, all the questions will come from here. So the written there'll be a few short written, they will all use the key terms. The definition questions will literally just be a subsection of the key terms, and you'll have to write down what they mean. So this is your best friend. In class, I would encourage you to just have this downloaded and just take notes on the definitions as I go through them. So that's the most important document. I will be up, so as you can all see, my phone's here, I'm filming these lectures. They will all go here, so you can rewatch them, or if you miss class, you can watch them there, although there's a very good reason to not miss class, which I'll be talking about in the syllabus. but students in the past have said they appreciated that. The rest of this I'll come back to later, I guess. These two things are completely optional. This is if you want to kind of go in more depth or you get interested in a particular topic. There's some videos here that you can watch and some articles in the Stanford Encyclopedia of Philosophy, but those are, as I say, optional. Okay, let's talk about the most important thing, other than the key terms list, the syllabus. So some people worry about what to call their instructor. You can call me David or Mr. Simpson. I don't care, either way is fine. I'm defending my dissertation this summer, but I'm technically not a PhD yet, so I'm not Dr. Simpson or Professor Simpson. But I really don't mind being called David. That's totally fine with me. I always had a little bit of contempt for professors who insisted on being called Dr. So-and-so. I kind of thought, yeah, one day you're gonna die and no one will remember you. Does it really matter? I don't know. So, call me whatever you want. Not whatever you want. Call me David or Mr. Simpson. As I say here, if you have a question, check the syllabus first, and if it pertains to everyone, please ask the question on course questions. The textbooks are required, so I just checked. They are both in the bookstore. You should get both of them. I think they're like 120 if you buy both, so like 80 and 40 or something like that. And you will need them for the daily quizzes, which I'll be talking about. So those are required. As I say here, I do not use PowerPoint slides. Some students are initially skeptical of that, but once I actually get going, they find that it's actually much better. I use the whiteboard, because when you use PowerPoint, it's just too tempting to just read off the slides. So I'll be using the whiteboard and video clips. Little disclaimer, this should be obvious, but I'll say it anyways. If I show a video clip of someone, that does not mean I agree with every single thing that that person has ever said. So, say that. Here's an outline of what we'll be going through in what order. Note that before each test, there will be a test review day. So that's a good day to come with questions. It's also useful because if I wind up falling behind a little bit, like we spend more time on Popper, for example, the first hour or so of that class, I can just finish up whatever we didn't get to, and then answer any questions and maybe do like a broad crash course review. So hopefully that is helpful. It looks like the test will be, the final will be here on June 13th at 3. I'll confirm when that's officially confirmed, but tentatively that's where and when it should be. As should be apparent, that means this class will go by pretty quickly. So I would encourage you to kind of stay on top of things. It will make it easier. I have some study tips here. One thing I'll say, because it probably will come up, so when I taught intro psych, so the courses I've taught here are 104 and 105, and there I said on the first days of class, I will not be changing grades at the end of semester due to student requests. In those courses, it was all multiple choice and like a few written, and the written were always really clear whether you got it wrong or right. In a class like this, there's a bit more ambiguity, so I am more open to you coming to me and saying, oh, maybe I deserve a better grade on the paper or something like that. But what I will say is, if you come to me with a request for me to take a second look at a grade, I don't care if you're really close to your dream grade. Like students will say, oh no, I'm 0.5% away from an A-. That's irrelevant to me. One reason you shouldn't really care about that is this: if you have not used the UPA GPA calculator or UAlberta GPA calculator, just try it. It's very insightful. You put down 40 courses, change one from a B+ to an A-, and see what happens. Nothing will happen. It really doesn't matter. So I will only be changing grades on the basis of merit. If you're like, no, I think I deserve a better grade on this, but I don't care if you're close to your dream grade or whatever. So I encourage you to just do your best in this course and let the chips fall where they may. Don't count on being able to write a really sad email at the end trying to get a better grade. Just do your best from the beginning. Okay, so here's the breakdown of the grades. as I say, there's daily true-false quizzes. They are already all on eClass. They are not designed to be hard. It's just 5 true or false questions. It is just my way of forcing you to do a little bit of the reading before class. You don't have to read every last page or every last sentence, but you have to kind of skim enough of it to get a sense of what the major points are. So those should be easy marks. Additionally, they're a way of me taking attendance, basically, because even though I don't want to make discussion required, this is my way of at least getting you to show up, having done some of the reading, and therefore hopefully making discussion more likely, but you will not receive any participation grade. Very importantly, if you know you will miss a class, what you will have to do instead is send me a short summary of the chapters you read. So you can do that in advance. It must be submitted before the beginning of class. So if you know you're going to miss a class for whatever reason, you don't need any special, I mean, you could miss every class if you want, just watch the YouTube videos and send summaries, but that's probably harder than just doing the short quizzes. But, so that's what you should do if you know something will come up. I will note, I gave all of these quizzes to ChatGPT, wanted to see how ChatGPT would do. It almost always got at least one of them wrong, and in one case it got 3 of the 5 wrong. So I do not encourage the use of ChatGPT. I mean, it's probably better than 50-50 overall, but you're better off skimming the book. There's the paper, which I'll come to. But one thing I will say is, you have to submit sort of 3 things for the paper. A physical copy, which will be on the day of test 1, that's when it's due. I view it almost as part of test 1, just the part that you write before. You must submit a version online in the eClass, and you must submit an audio recording of you reading the paper out loud. No prof of mine has ever done this. This is a little idea I had. Is when I've had to mark long papers, not this one's very long, it's only 7 to 9 pages, but one of the most common comments I make is, please read this sentence out loud. Because when you read something out loud, it's much easier to notice if it makes no sense. So I will not listen to more than like 10 seconds of it, but it's just a way of me to get you to do that. And you will find mistakes that you would not have found otherwise. That's virtually guaranteed. Okay, then there's the 2 tests. Both of the tests will have 30 definition questions, and as I say, those don't have to be full sentences. As long as you're able to get the gist onto the page, that's enough. So those are each 15% on each of the tests, and then 5 short answer questions that do have to be in full sentences. As I say, all of the questions from those parts are from the key terms. So if you know the key terms well, you'll be fine. Those should not be hard. And then for test 2, there will also be the in-class essay on Daniel Dennett versus David Chalmers, and that is already on eClass. The exact form of the question that you'll see on the test I give you, you can look now, it's already on eClass. You'll have 5 minutes for the daily quizzes and 2 hours and 50 minutes, so all of class time for test 1, and 3 hours for test 2. So if you're really crunched for time on test 1, that means you should probably study more, because you have basically the same amount of time for test 2, but obviously it's longer because it includes the in-class essay. And of course, please bring your student ID to test 1 and 2. So that's the grading rubric. Any questions about any of that? Okay, that all makes sense? Okay. Okay, the paper. Let's go through this as well. I will say right now, you should probably start at least taking bullet point notes for this, like this week. So for Friday, you'll be reading about Karl Popper. Just start taking a few notes, I would say. Just start getting ready for that. The paper is meant to be pretty simple. I'm just looking to see that you've understood Popper and Kuhn, and that you can make some connections to psychology. So here's how the paper should be structured. There will be a summary of Popper's philosophy of science. Each section should be around 1 to 2 pages. It should be between 7 and 9 pages total. So it should, I'm not going to do word count, this is simpler for you all. The text should at least touch the 7th page, and there should be no title page or anything like that. And it should not touch the 10th page. So that's how long it should be. So about 1 to 2 pages for each of these sections. So a summary of Karl Popper, and then a section discussing a connection between Popper's views and psychology. So there's different ways you could go there. Same thing for Kuhn, summary of his work, and a summary of how he connects to psychology. And then a final section with a concluding argument. Here you have some options. So you could argue that just one of them is right, like you could take Popper's side or Kuhn's side, or you could try to integrate them in some way and say maybe they're not so incompatible, maybe there's a way to bridge the disagreement. So I'll be a bit friendlier with marking that one because I am asking you kind of to go beyond the material you're given in the course, but you should at least take a stab at either defending one of them or integrating. I won't go through all the formatting stuff, just read this carefully and please follow instructions. You're all 4th year students, I think I'm right to expect that of you. So it is due on the day of test 1, and you'll have to submit it both on eClass and hand in a physical copy, double-sided, before the test as you walk in. You'll have to use 5 sources. You can use more if you want to, but you can get full marks with 5. One is this book, right? So it has a chapter on Popper and a chapter on Kuhn. You should cite both of those. I have on eClass a book by Popper and a book by Kuhn. You do not have to read these books in their entirety. I have recommended some chapters to have a look at. You should be just kind of looking through it for some support for different points. I'm not expecting you to read all of them, so you have to cite both of those. And then one source that's a psychology source for a connection between Popper and psychology, and one psychology source for a connection between Kuhn and psychology. It does not have to be a source that's directly about Kuhn or Popper. It could be, I don't know, a paper on Freud, and you could talk about how this is not very Popperian, this thing that talks about what Freud thought. That's just an example, but it has to be some kind of psychology source that you can use for sections 2 and 4, so the sections where you're drawing a connection to psychology. Okay, and last thing, so I already talked about the audio recording, which you lose marks if you don't include. So ChatGPT, so what are the rules here? I will be giving the essay question to ChatGPT in a few different ways and other AI, paper writing things. If I see any direct quotes from ChatGPT, that will be an automatic 0. So there should be you should not take any writing from ChatGPT. However, personally, I see no problem with using ChatGPT or other AI software to find grammar errors. I think that's fine. You should not ask it to fix the grammar errors, but if you give your paper to ChatGPT and say, are there any grammar errors here? If so, tell me where they are, and then you fix them yourself, I think that's fine. Don't assume that other profs are okay with that, but as far as I'm concerned, that's fine. So those are the rules for using AI. And then, as I say, for test 2, you'll be doing a very similar paper, but just on Daniel Dennett versus David Chalmers instead of Popper and Kuhn. I also have some resources for that, but these are not required. So if you want to go above and beyond and impress me, you can use any of these for the Dennett versus Chalmers paper, but you can just use what I say in class and you can still get full marks. Okay, and I think, oh yeah, and then last thing, of course, if you cannot make the test for some reason, I need some kind of documentation. If you get hit by a bus or something happens, please provide some kind of documentation. Okay, that's all I have to say by way of the syllabus. Any questions about any of that? Okay. So today we're going to start class content. We have a lot to go through. So we'll be doing chapters 1 and 2. And also a little preamble before chapter 1. So chapter 1 is on the history of science. Might be a little dry. Some of it might be a review for many of you, but many of the examples that we talk about in chapter 1 will come up again and again. For example, the transition from Newton to Einstein is very important in philosophy of science. We're not going to be learning like the equations or anything like that, but you should have at least a rough sense of what happened there. And then chapter 2 is on positivism, which is the view that I already mentioned. But before that, I will also do a little brief history of just a few main characters in philosophy, since this is a philosophy of science class. And some of the early debates in the history of philosophy are going to be relevant to many different things in this course. So the big three, the three early philosophers in the standard way of telling the story. I mean, there were philosophers before this, so-called pre-Socratic philosophers, but how many of you have seen these names? I assume at least most of you. So Socrates was a very important philosopher. There's a nice story about him, which is probably not true, but it's kind of emblematic of how philosophy is at least supposed to work. The story is that Socrates, an ancient Greek figure, met the oracle at Delphi, who told him, "You are the wisest man in the world." And Socrates was like, "Wait, I'm not wise. I'm pretty average." But then what he thought about it, and what he concluded was, "I am wise because I know that I don't know. I'm aware of my own ignorance." Whereas all these other philosophers, they all think they know things that they in fact don't know. And so what he did was he went around the town arguing with all the smartest people in Athens and showed them, and he would just question them, like, how do you know that? What do you mean by that? And showed that they didn't know what they thought they knew, and so they killed him. So that's what happens. So that's what he's famous for. His student, Plato, in some ways was a rebellion against this. Plato developed a very rigid metaphysical picture of the world in which there were these invisible forms in the heavens. So he thought that things like numbers were in this invisible realm, things like the form of an apple. So there's apples in the world, but there's like the form of the apple, which is kind of crazy. And importantly for our purposes, Plato was a rationalist, whereas his student Aristotle, so this is like in kind of order, so Socrates was Plato's teacher, and Plato was Aristotle's teacher. But Aristotle was an empiricist. This is a very important debate that goes on throughout the history of philosophy, and I'll say a bit about what the difference is. Actually, can anyone tell me what either of these mean? Like, what does empiricist mean? You should have seen that probably, some of you.
So a rationalist would believe that the way to come to knowledge on a subject is through thought,
Yep.
Whereas an empiricist would believe that it comes through observation.
Exactly. So, as she correctly says, a rationalist believes that the way to discover the truth, at least about some topics, is through just pure rational thought. You can just sit in the armchair, think about it, and figure out what's true. Whereas an empiricist says, no, the only way to figure out what's true is by looking at the world. You cannot discover what's true by thinking about it. You have to observe the world. You have to do measurements, testing, etc. But one thing that unites all of these figures, and it goes back to what I started off by saying, is questioning. They were all, at least Plato maybe not towards the end, but trying to be skeptical, trying to question how we can know what we know. And one other important figure that I'll mention, who's going to come up again today, is René Descartes, who kind of took this to the next level. Descartes was an early figure in the scientific revolution. He was a so-called polymath, so he was kind of an expert in everything. He was both a philosopher and a scientist and a mathematician. And he engaged in this process of kind of questioning everything until he could get down to what he thought you could know for sure. And since this is an introduction to philosophy class, I think it's essentially obligatory that I talk about both him and The Matrix. How many of you have seen the film The Matrix? I feel old. So what Descartes did was he kind of asked himself, what can I know? And so he said, okay, I think I know I'm in a room right now, but you know, I could be dreaming, I could be a brain in a vat. He wouldn't have used that word, but you know, I could just be a brain in a vat of nutrients with signals being fed to me. And so what he eventually concluded was the one thing I can know for sure is that I exist, which I'll talk about later today and in the philosophy of mind section. But one film, so as I say, I like showing video clips, one film that took this idea and ran with it was The Matrix. So The Matrix is this famous movie, or it was, where the premise is all humans are in these little vats where signals are fed to their brain and their bodies are used as batteries for AR. And the world that everyone thinks they're in is just an illusion that's fed to them by this, this computer input that's sent to their brain. But there are some humans who still walk around in the real world and they rescue people from these vats and they try to defeat the machines. That's the premise of the movie. And it's a helpful way to think about what the kind of thing Descartes was worried about. So we'll have a little fun. We'll watch a clip of The Matrix. And after that, I'll say a tiny bit more and then we'll get started on the content in the book. Okay, so that's just a nice visualization of the kind of thing Descartes was thinking about. It's not that anyone obviously believes that kind of thing is true, nor that Descartes did, but how could you know that it's not true? Could you prove that it's not true? And the classic thing that intro philosophy professors will bug you with is, of course, in some sense, you couldn't know that it's not true. I'll be saying more about Descartes later, but so that's a little introduction to kind of the main figures in the history of philosophy. There's obviously others, but hopefully that is helpful. So now we'll be talking about chapter 1, which is highlights from the history of science. Although there's also some philosophy background there too. In fact, the first section talks about different areas in philosophy and how they can relate to science. In the standard way of talking about philosophy, there are 3 main areas: epistemology, metaphysics, and one that we don't really talk about, which is value, or sometimes called axiology, if you want to sound really fancy. So epistemology, which these two are in the key terms, is the study of how we know things, or how we can know things. So the rationalism versus empiricism debate, that is a topic in epistemology. Metaphysics is about what's real. So a question like, does God exist? Do we have souls? Or are Plato's forms real? Is there a heavenly realm of like numbers and stuff like that? Or, those would all be metaphysical questions. So one popular metaphysical view in science is materialism, or physicalism, the view that the only things that exist are physical things, and the things made up of physical things. And then value we won't really talk about in this class, but that's things like ethics and aesthetics. So what's right and wrong, what is beauty, those would be questions in value theory. As I said, though, we'll be primarily talking about the first two in connection to science. And in philosophy of science, which is what the first half of the course is on, we are not in the business of making scientific theories. We are in the business of stepping outside of science and kind of taking an outsider's perspective and asking what's going on when scientists formulate theories, draw inferences, etc. One way of doing that we'll see in positivism is trying to work out the logical structure of how science works. So in science, they have certain ways of drawing inferences. They have standards for what counts as proof. And a philosopher of science, one role they can have is trying to understand what the logical rules are for concluding that a theory is likely or unlikely, and things like that. One distinction that's very important for the different types of philosophy of science that we'll talk about, and this will, for example, be relevant to the Popper versus Kuhn debate, is the distinction between descriptive theories of science. These are theories that philosophers of science give, and normative theories of science. So, a descriptive theory of how science works does not make a judgment about whether scientists are doing it correctly or incorrectly. So, you're just trying to describe or summarize, whatever, how science in fact works. What scientists in fact do when they practice science. So take Thomas Kuhn again. So Kuhn emphasizes that scientists have these things called paradigms, right? So a guiding set of assumptions. So one way of reading Kuhn, at least parts of Kuhn, is that he's engaged in a descriptive project. He's looking at the history of science and saying, yeah, it looks like scientists do in fact have these things called paradigms. Right? They have assumptions that they don't question. Normative theories in philosophy of science are about how should science work. In other words, when you're asking that question, you are allowed to say, sometimes scientists do X, Y, or Z, but they shouldn't. They're doing it incorrectly. Now, these will overlap, obviously, to some degree, because presumably science works reasonably well, so at least some of the time they're doing it the, quote, right way. But conceptually, these are distinct ideas. Descriptive is about how scientists in fact do their work, and normative theories are about how scientists should do their work. So for example, Popper in some of his work concedes that Kuhn is descriptively right. Scientists do often have these assumptions they don't question, but he says they shouldn't. Normatively, they should be more open-minded. So that's one example of how these two can potentially come apart. So then the book has a discussion of three different ideas that relate to science, three different themes that will come up again and again, one of which we've already talked about, which is empiricism. So one important feature of science is that it tends to be guided by an empiricist view of epistemology, that the way to prove things right or the way to know about the world is to do observations. You can't just sit down and think about things, you have to measure, test, you have to look at the world. One thing I'll note as an aside, because the book could have been a bit more clear in distinguishing this, and some of your other books may have been unclear. This distinction I'm going to make now is not testable, but it may help you think clearly if you've seen this term used in different senses. So empiricism as a term has two distinct meanings, one of which is about the, you could say, the origin of our ideas, and one of which is about the, you could say, justification for our ideas. So empiricism means having to do with experience. So sometimes the word is used to describe how we get our ideas. On this view, if you have an empiricist view about the origin of ideas, you're essentially taking the nurture side of the nature-nurture debate. Empiricism is sometimes used in that sense, where our ideas and tendencies are not given to us by our genes or by our nature, they come to us from experience. They come to us from what we see and hear, etc. So in that sense, empiricism is juxtaposed with nativism, which you don't need to know that, so sometimes you'll hear people speak of empiricism versus nativism. That we won't be talking about. It's not relevant to this course. If I use the word empiricism, I mean it in this sense, where the question is not where do we get our ideas, maybe they're innate, maybe they come from experience, who cares? Here we're asking, how do we know whether our ideas are right? And an empiricist in this sense is going to say, we can only know if our ideas are right based on testing them through observation. So I won't talk about this distinction again. I'm just going to clarify that when I say empiricism, assume I mean this sense. Does that make sense? Any questions about that distinction? Okay. So that's that. And the book gives some examples of early versions of science, early examples of scientific practice, where it essentially is just systematic, careful empiricism. Just carefully looking at the world, taking note of what you see, trying to draw inferences on that basis, and sometimes without mathematics or sophisticated theories, just careful observation. However, clearly that's not all that's going on, right? There are lots of human activities that involve careful observation of the world that we wouldn't really call science. There seems to be more going on than just looking at the world. Right? Businessmen look at the world carefully too. So one feature that also distinguishes science is the use of mathematics. Although I guess business people do too, some economics they do, but in any case, this is one thing the book talks about. So this goes back to Galileo, right? So Galileo is one of the first people to carefully integrate mathematics and science. He has a famous quote, roughly to the effect of, God wrote two books. He was a Christian, so one of them is the Bible, and the other is the Book of Nature, right? So the world. And he says that the Book of Nature is written in the language of mathematics. That, if you want to understand the world, you have to describe it mathematically. What mathematics enables you to do, of course, is to be very precise about what you observe, and to develop precise theories that explain what you observe. Now, this is not, strictly speaking, essential to science, because there are, as I've already kind of hinted at, examples of scientific theories that are not, at least not initially, cashed out in terms of mathematical theories. One example is Darwinian evolution, which, Darwin, if you read The Origin of Species, there are no equations. Right? It's just, it's not cashed out in that way. Later, of course, it was, right, with evolutionary game theory, but often scientific theories start off not being mathematical, but the best sciences, when they're fully developed, do tend to involve mathematics. Another feature of science that the book talks about that will be important for someone like Kuhn is the social structure. Right, so science is a human activity, it's an institution, right? You have to go through university and get hired as a professor to be able to do science and get funding from the government. And one thing that philosophers of science look at is how science is structured as a social institution. What are the features of science as an institution that make it more successful? This will be important, as I say, to someone like Thomas Kuhn. Now, as far as the history, there's a version of the history of science that you'll often see, and it's definitely oversimplified. I wouldn't go to the mat arguing with this description, but it's an okay first approximation, and it may help you to organize the information I'll give you about the history. So in the kind of standard way of talking about the history of science, it goes something like this. Prior to the ancient Greeks, there was ignorance, right? So prior to that, no one knew what a germ or an atom was. There was, people just took things on the basis of tradition. There was not careful experimentation and observation of the world. And then there was the ancient Greeks, which is arguably where science and philosophy, at least in our sense, began. So it had some of the first scientists. So Aristotle, for example, did careful observations and developed his own theories of biology and physics and so on. Afterwards, in the medieval period. Now this is a little more controversial. Some people say we underestimate how much was done in the medieval period, but in the standard version, there was a period of relative stagnation as far as science goes, at least in Europe. The works of people like Aristotle and other ancient Greeks were preserved in the Islamic world, but in Europe there was not as much progress, at least in the standard telling of things. And then in the 1400s, 1300s, in Europe, they started to rediscover the works of the ancient Greeks and emphasize them more. This was called the Renaissance, which then made way for the scientific revolution in the 15-ish hundreds. I won't test you on exact dates, but that's 15, 1600s thereabouts is where it's generally thought that modern science began. And even though the scientific revolution was preceded by people rediscovering the works of people like Aristotle, it was in several important ways a breaking away from Aristotle. So one thing that's very important to Aristotle's view of nature is teleology, or purpose. Aristotle thought that the world, things in the world have purposes. They are oriented towards certain things. So for example, why do things fall? Well, because they're headed towards their natural place. Why do biological organisms have the various functions that they do? Well, because that's what they're designed to do. That's what they're oriented towards. Whereas in the scientific revolution, it's an important feature of the scientific worldview that we view things in terms of mechanism. We don't say that things fall to their natural place. We don't have this view that it's all oriented towards something. It's in terms of physical mechanisms. One example of a consequence of the teleological view is that things all have perfection in them. So for example, the orbits of the planetary, or the things in the sky, so stars and planets, prior to the scientific revolution, it was assumed it had to be circular. Actually, even Galileo had that view too. It all has to be perfect circles. So Ptolemy is the one who developed the view that the Earth is at the center, everything orbits around the Earth, and he and everyone after him thought that those orbits had to be perfectly circular, because that's part of the perfection inherent in the natural world. This ran into problems though, because then when you actually try to apply models of the stars that have them going on circular orbits, the predictions come out wrong. They were also assuming that the Earth was in the center, and what wound up happening was you had these things called ellipses, where you would have kind of circles within circles. Or sorry, not ellipses, epicycles. So epicycles. So let's say this is the Earth. On their model, of course, the Earth was in the center. And let's say this is Venus. So Venus would have its orbit like this, but it would also have another kind of sub-orbit like this. So there's two types of rotation going on, and that still didn't quite work. And I forget the number, but I think by the end they wound up having like 7 epicycles for different things, because they were trying to match this model to the observations, which was quite difficult because, as I hope you all know, the Earth is not at the center of the universe, and orbits are not perfectly circular. But that was the kind of thing they had to go, the lengths they had to go to make the model work. As an aside, I know a professor who was having a debate with somebody in psychology about the nature of emotions, and this professor had kind of an older view in a certain sense, and he was accused of engaging in postulating epicycles to make his theory fit the data. And in philosophy or science, that's like a sick burn. So there you go. If you ever go to graduate school, you accuse someone of postulating epicycles, that's like, well, those are fighting words in science. The person who in the scientific revolution who first put forward the idea that the sun is in the center is Copernicus. So he said, wait, you can get rid of a lot of these epicycles and make the model much simpler if you assume the sun is in the center. Yes?
Can you explain mechanism again?
Explain what?
Mechanism?
Yeah, mechanism is just it's kind of it's a part of a view of how to do science where you treat the universe like a clock, if I'm going to add to it. So if you want to understand a clock, you just think of it as a machine that obeys simple rules, and you can understand how it keeps track of time just by how it functions, by what it does. Does that help?
I just didn't hear the first time you said it.
Oh, okay, yeah, that's fine. So yeah, that's what, and it's, I guess the more important part is it involves no postulation of teleology. There's no teleology. There's no design or purpose. It's just brute mechanism. Anyway, so Copernicus was the first one to say, we can make these models a lot simpler if we assume that the sun, not the Earth, is at the center of the universe. Sorry, the center of the solar system. And then, of course, this view was defended and supported by Galileo, who used his telescopes to show that the first thing he found was that there were moons orbiting around Jupiter, and that you could just observe. So that showed that there were at least some things that orbited around something other than the Earth. And he wound up defending the Copernican view. So watch another video talking a bit about Galileo. It's hard to say who exactly is the one person who deserves the most credit for founding modern science, but if gun to your head, you had to pick someone, it would be Galileo. So watch a video of him. It will reinforce some of these points. Okay, so that's a great video summing up some of the stuff we've talked about, in particular Galileo. And from that very famous story about Galileo, I think there are three important lessons. I believe these are listed in the key terms that Galileo teaches us about how science works. One, which the Einstein quote mentions, is reliance on observation. Right? That's something Galileo emphasized. The other is the use of mathematics. Right? As I think I quoted Galileo earlier, right? The book of nature is written in the language of mathematics. And a third one that comes out in the story about his run-in with the church is that science should involve open-ended criticism. Nothing should be sort of taken as sacrosanct. We shouldn't just accept things as a matter of tradition. We should always be willing to revise and criticize ideas that are currently popular or taken to be true. Okay, and then just a few other things from chapter 1. Once we finish chapter 1, we'll take a break. So yeah, Kepler was mentioned in the video. He's the one who discovered that the orbits are actually not perfectly circular, but are ellipses, kind of oval-like shapes. Even Galileo still stuck to the idea that they were circular. And then, of course, another scientist, by some accounts the most important scientist, even though Galileo was the first in the modern period, is Isaac Newton. So Newton had several important insights, but probably the most important was he developed a way to show that, so prior to him, you would explain why planets orbited the sun in one way and why objects fell on Earth in another way, but he showed that you could have one theory that explained both, right? The universal law of gravity. And for hundreds of years, Newton's laws were able to successfully explain essentially all of the experimental evidence. It was, by some accounts, the most successful theory ever in science. Some philosophers even tried to explain how Newton's theories were necessarily true because there was so much support for it. One way in which it is sometimes phrased as a break from mechanism in a certain sense. So I said earlier that when you have a mechanical view of the world, you view the world as essentially a giant clock that can be understood in terms of mechanism, but with Newton, there's something called action at a distance, right? It's instantaneous, at a distance, there's this attractive force between two things, which seems kind of spooky, and Newton himself thought it was spooky and seemingly absurd, but that's where all the evidence pointed, so for a long time, that was the standard view. And then the last bit of history is the two currently most important theories in fundamental physics. And they will come up in various ways as examples. I will not be expecting you to know how these theories work. I don't know how they work. I don't know enough math. But today in physics, the two most important theories are quantum physics, which is the theory of how things work at the small scale, so atoms, electrons, and Einstein's relativity theory, which was in important ways a break with Newtonian physics. So there were certain things that Newton's theory could not explain, for example, the orbit of Mercury. Relativity came along, and importantly, it was able to explain why Newton got most things right, but it could correctly explain things like the orbit of Mercury and some other things. And the transition from Newtonian physics to Einstein's theory will be used by multiple people as examples to prove their theory, or to support their theory. So Popper is going to cite this, and Kuhn will. You don't have to worry about the details now, we'll talk more about that when we get to them, but that's an example that's going to come up a lot, the transition from Newtonian physics to Einstein's physics. Okay. Any questions on chapter 1? All right, let's take a break. Be back here by 1. So you can go get coffee, stretch your legs, do whatever you want. When we come back, we'll start chapter 2 on positivism. Okay, let's get started again. So one thing I forgot to mention about the key terms. So maybe a few days ago, I made some changes to it. Just a few terms I removed and a few terms I added, so make sure you have like the most recent version. Forgot to mention that. Additionally, with the video clips I show, they will not be in the lecture that's posted online, but I'll include like a link to the Google Doc that has them if you want to rewatch them or whatever. Okay, so we'll now get into the chapter on positivism. So the title of the chapter is Empiricism, but the bulk of it is devoted to a particular version of empiricism, namely positivism, which is a very strict view according to which science should only deal with what's directly observable. They have some other commitments too, but prior to talking about that, a little bit of history. So I already mentioned Descartes. I'm going to talk a bit about him again, just because he's a nice contrast with some of the views we'll talk about. So Descartes is a rationalist. He thinks that at least the most solid way to figure out what's true is to think about things. So as I mentioned, he engaged in doubt, trying to doubt everything until he could get down to what he was 100% certain of. And the famous conclusion that he drew was cogito ergo sum. You don't need to know that phrase, but it means I think, therefore I am. And the way he reasoned was, look, I might be dreaming, I might not really have a body, I might not really be in the room I'm in right now, but I at least know that I'm doubting right now. And if I'm doubting, I'm thinking. And I can only think if I exist. Kind of a cute little argument. So that was his foundation. He thought I can at least know that I exist, even if I know nothing else, and that is the foundation upon which he tried to build the rest of his beliefs. And I'm going to show a video of him, about him, because this will come up actually again in the philosophy of mind. So he's an important figure to understand. So I have a video from Crash Course Philosophy, which is a nice resource most of the time. And then I'll talk about the people who came after him, namely the empiricists, who are the more natural precursors to positivism. But I'll start with this Descartes video. So could someone get the lights again? 10% bonus. No. So as I say, Descartes was a rationalist. Once he concluded that he could know that he existed, he had a kind of funny argument for inferring that God exists from that, and he thought he could build up all of knowledge on that basis. This, of course, was controversial, He was French, as I said earlier. And in Britain, following Descartes, there were a group of people known as the British empiricists, and the view that observation is how you can show what's true became more popular. I give a few names in the key terms, but the one that you should know, the only one I would test you on in this context, is David Hume. Hume is very useful for understanding how the positivists thought. So as I say, the empiricists, including Hume, thought that the way to know what's true is by observation. But there's one important exception to this, and that is things that are true by definition. So think, for example, about 2 + 2 = 4. Presumably all of you believe that's true. Now, do we do experiments to prove that's true? Do we have to like test or measure it? No, you just can sit down and think about it. You know, given what 2 means, and what plus means, and what 4 means, it's just true by definition that 2 + 2 = 4. At least that's what the empiricists would say. Or something like all bachelors are unmarried. Presumably you all believe that because bachelor means young unmarried male. So by definition, all bachelors are unmarried. So Hume, sometimes called Hume's fork, thought there were 2 ways to know things. Relations of ideas and matters of fact. So this allows him to carve out an exception to empiricism, which is what I was just talking about. But in a certain sense, so relations of ideas would be things like 2 + 2 = 4, all bachelors are unmarried. They have to do with what our words mean or what our ideas are. It's not things that are in any interesting sense true of the world. When you assert 2 + 2 = 4, you're not really saying anything informative. You're just saying something that is, as I say, true by definition. With regard to matters of fact, you have to use observation. You have to look at the world. So a matter of fact would be like, you know, how many moons does Jupiter have? You can't sit down and think really hard about that. You have to go look and see how many moons Jupiter has. So that's an important distinction that Hume makes, and he says very provocatively at the end of one of his books that apart from these 2 things, there is no way to know anything. So he has this kind of famous quote that any book that's about any topic, if it's not based on one of these 2 things, throw the book into the fire. It contains nothing but sophistry and illusion. And that view is picked up by the positivists, and that's who we'll be talking about today. So positivism, and more specifically logical positivism, emerged in Vienna, in Austria. There was a group called the Vienna Circle. I won't test you on the names. They're listed in the key terms just as a point of interest. But it was a group of philosophers and logicians who, drawing on people like Hume, said that we should only deal with what we can directly observe, at least in science and generally. You'll sometimes see the phrase logical empiricism. Don't worry about it. There's one way of defining them in which they are somewhat distinct, but for the test you will not need to worry about the difference. For the purpose of this class, logical empiricism and logical positivism are essentially the same. I'll just be saying positivism when I talk about it. So most of you, if I remember correctly, did not raise your hand to yes, science should only deal with what's directly observable. So what motivated them to take this line? There are several things. One of them is they wanted to get rid of bad philosophy. They thought that many of the popular philosophers of the day were writing a bunch of nonsense. So one example the book talks about is Hegel, who, I won't test you on him, but he's someone who thought that the world had like a world spirit that was orienting the world towards perfection. He would say things like, the absolute is perfect. It's like, what does that mean? It doesn't mean anything, these people would say. Another example is Heidegger. He was one of their favorite people to hate on. Heidegger also wrote a lot of incomprehensible nonsense. My brother likes Heidegger, and one time to show him how terrible Heidegger was, I had a book of his on the shelf, pulled it off the shelf, flipped to a random page with my eyes closed and pointed to a line. The sentence I got was, "It is it itself." And it's like, well, that doesn't mean anything. So the positivists thought people like that gave philosophy a bad name, so we needed to be more rigorous and strict to get rid of all that metaphysical nonsense. Oh, as an aside, Heidegger was also a Nazi, so there's that. The positivists, by contrast, were primarily, as the book says, socialists and social democrats. That's kind of aside, really. Although it is relevant in this sense, or for this point, they were writing a lot of their work in the 20s and 30s in Europe. Eventually, most of them had to flee because a lot of them were also Jewish. And being a Jewish socialist in Central Europe is in the 30s is not a good deal, so a lot of them fled. So related to what I've been saying, they had two central goals. The positivists had two main goals. One was the rational reconstruction of science. In other words, they wanted to show how you could demonstrate that scientific theories were true purely as a matter of logic. So we'll be doing a bit of logic next class as well, but just as an example of how logic works. So logic involves, at least deductive logic, showing that a conclusion has to be true given the premises. So famous example, all men are mortal. This is an example from Aristotle. It's in all the logic textbooks. All men are mortal. Socrates is a man. We would now say Socrates is a human, but it's the Aristotle version. Conclusion, Socrates is mortal. So these are the two premises, and this is the conclusion. And the conclusion logically or deductively follows from the premises. Meaning, if you believe these two premises, you have to believe the conclusion. If someone was to say, well, I believe that all men are mortal, and I believe that Socrates is a man, but I don't believe Socrates is mortal, he's engaged in a self-contradiction. If you believe these, you have to believe this. And the positivists had the goal of showing that science was like that given the observations we have, you can logically show that the theories have to be true. Spoiler alert, this was a profound failure. It was a nice idea, it was a bold idea, but a profound failure. But that was what they wanted to do. And their other goal was the liquidation of metaphysics. They hated metaphysics, partly because of people like Hegel and Heidegger, and other people who were engaged in what they thought was a bunch of nonsense. So this relates to what I said earlier, that they didn't want to have anything that was unobservable. They only wanted to include in theories things that you can directly observe. Another important, actually I've said quite a bit so far. Any questions before I say the next thing? This all making sense so far? Yep. Just good to check in. Important idea from them is the verifiability theory or criterion of meaning. So when figuring out what sentences mean, they thought that, or argued that, the meaning of a sentence, any sentence, is the method of its verification. A sentence has no meaning beyond how you would test it, how you would try to verify it. So take the sentence, there is a red apple on the table. The only meaning that sentence has is how would I observationally confirm or disconfirm that idea. So saying there's a red apple on the table just means, what you would observe. It has no meaning beyond that. So that's how you get rid of metaphysics, because if you can't directly observe something, it's meaningless. They thought there were only 3 kinds of sentences: true, false, and meaningless. So at least leaving aside statements that are true by definition, like 2 + 2 = 4. Other than statements like that, they are either true, false, or meaningless via verification. So if it can be, if it's confirmed, so there is a red apple on this table. I look, if there was an apple there, the sentence would be true. If there isn't, it's false. Any sentence that is incapable of being verified, so like God exists, Plato's heaven exists, anything like that, is meaningless, according to positivism. There's a story about a positivist whose name doesn't matter in the UK, who, it was in Oxford, and at Oxford they have prayers, they say grace. It's part of like the formalism, because the church has like an Anglican background. And A.J. Ayer, who's his name, was a positivist, would say grace, and everyone knew he was didn't believe in God. And someone challenged him and said, how do you say this in good conscience, like, given that you don't believe? He says, look, I will never say falsehoods. I never say anything false, but I have no problem saying meaningless statements. So that's kind of gives you a sense of how the positivists thought. Now, to reinforce this point, I have a video from an excellent series called Boundaries of the Knowable. It's a set of videos that are very interesting and thought-provoking. It's about quantum physics. Oh, nice, preempting. I'll say a little bit before. What's your name, by the way?
Kayla.
Kayla, thank you very much for doing that, by the way. The video is about quantum physics. Don't worry about the details. Worry about where he takes it. So he talks about some paradoxes in quantum physics and ends by saying the solution to these paradoxes is to only deal with what's directly observable. So he doesn't use the word positivism, but it's a good summary of kind of how it works. So, as I say, don't worry about the details of quantum physics. This is not a physics class, but the solution that was offered at the end is the way out of some of these paradoxes is just to say, we're not going to theorize about what electrons really are. We're just going to focus on how they behave, what they do when we're observing them. And again, even though he doesn't use the word positivism, that's very similar to how the positivists would have put it. Okay. An important distinction they made, which relates to something I said about Hume, is the analytic synthetic distinction. And I'll put in brackets, for the purpose of this class, this is synonymous with a pair of terms the book sometimes uses, which is a priori and a posteriori. This is essentially the same distinction. So analytic statements, or a priori statements, are ones where you can know whether it's true simply by definition. This would be the same as roughly what Hume says, or puts under relations of ideas. So things like 2 + 2 = 4, all bachelors are unmarried. Whereas synthetic or a posteriori statements, you have to do observations to know whether they are true. The words a priori or a posteriori have to do with before and after. So if you know that something is true a priori, that means you can know it prior to experience, prior to observation. Whereas for this, you can only find out whether it's true after observation. So that was a very important commitment of the positivists, is this distinction. As we're going to see at the end of the chapter, if we have time, this distinction was challenged by someone named Quine. A lot of names today. Another distinction is the distinction between the context of discovery and the context of justification. So these are both types of questions you can ask, or contexts in which you can ask a question about scientific theories. So take any scientific theory, Darwinian evolution, the theory that traits are passed on via DNA, whatever you like. There are two questions we can ask. We can ask, what are the psychological and sociological variables that led the scientists to come up with the theory? And should we believe this theory? What's the evidence for this theory, and does it support the theory or not? So when we ask the first kind of question, we're asking about the context of discovery. So for example, and I'll show a video where someone gives an example of this, there are some theories that scientists came to in kind of goofy ways. They had a dream, they visualized something, who knows, maybe they had some funny pizza that made them have a weird idea. Who knows? Or there could be sociological variables. So, you know, a sociologist might write about the fact that many of the early scientists were in Italy, like Galileo, for example. And maybe there's some cultural feature that contributes to that. But that is irrelevant, strictly speaking, when we're talking about the context of justification. Do we believe the theory or not? The fact that someone came up with a theory on the basis of a dream is interesting for the sociologist or the historian of science, or a psychologist analyzing the scientist's brain or something. But when we ask, is the theory true, we're asking about the context of justification. Does that make sense? I see a few slightly puzzled looks. Any questions about this distinction? Okay, another quick video of someone discussing. This is from another great series, which is Paul Meehl. I have him linked in the optional videos. So that's a nice little example. I didn't want to talk about that one because I may have gotten it wrong. I'm not a chemistry guy. But does that distinction make sense? Any questions about this? Okay, one last term before we talk about problems with positivism is operationism, sometimes called operationalism. We'll just call it operationism. This is kind of a particular variant of positivism that was actually very influential in psychology. The book briefly talks about it. It was developed by the physicist Percy Bridgman. You don't need to know his name, but he's the one who came up with it. It's in some ways a restating of positivism just for measurement. The view here is scientific terms are defined by the operations used to measure them. So terms have no meaning apart from the method of measurement. This is where we get the term, in psychology, operational definition. Even though we're not strict operationists in psychology, we still have the jargon. So take something like intelligence. You know, psychologists debate about what intelligence really is. An operationist would say it's the only meaning of intelligence is the method of its measurement. So IQ score. It has no meaning apart from that, would be the operationist way of saying it. At least intelligence in the scientific sense. Maybe it has an ordinary language sense that's different, but when we're writing a science paper, it has no meaning apart from the method of its measurement. This kind of leads into a discussion of its problems. This, although it was very popular in psychology, it actually never really caught on in physics. for the simple reason that there are many terms in science that are not defined this way. So take temperature as an example. In science, temperature is defined as the mean kinetic energy of the molecules. Basically, how fast are the molecules moving? It's not defined as the output on a thermometer, because thermometers can be off for various reasons that physicists understand. It's defined in terms of a theory. The theory being having to do with how fast the molecules are moving. So this leads us into a discussion of the problems with positivism and operationism. And there are several. Even though positivism was very influential in the 20th century, and even though it had many eminent defenders, it has been described as dead, or at least as dead as anything can be in philosophy. You will be hard-pressed to find anyone in contemporary philosophy or science who identifies as a positivist. It's rather unusual. So what are the problems with it? The first one is it's not something that was actually especially important for the downfall of positivism, but it is an objection that was brought up very early, and it's kind of a cute little argument, and that's the problem of self-refutation. So take the positivist commitments and think about them for a second. They say any sentence that is not true by definition is meaningless if it cannot be experimentally confirmed. But then turn that in on itself. So I'll say so any sentence that's not true by definition is meaningless if it can't be observationally confirmed, if you can't test it by looking at the world. But now take that sentence, and in short, basically, don't believe anything that can't be experimentally tested. Can that sentence be experimentally tested or confirmed? Well, obviously not. It's a claim about, it's really a philosophical commitment to what, how we can know things. And therefore, by its own standard, it's meaningless or false. So this is what I mean, what it's meant by self-refutation. By its own standard, it's false or meaningless. Another objection, this is one that Paul Meehl, the guy I just showed, brought up. It's not, we'll put it under the label the Centurion problem. There's not really a name for it to my knowledge, but there's a famous example that Meehl uses, and we'll just put it under this heading. So take the verifiability criterion of meaning. The meaning of a sentence is the method of its verification. Right? A sentence has no meaning beyond how it's measured or how it's verified. So take the sentence, Caesar crossed the Rubicon. I presume you all believe this if you know any important history. So Caesar crossed the Rubicon, which is a river in Italy, if I remember correctly. So what does that sentence mean? If we assume the verifiability criterion of meaning, for me, the meaning of this sentence is how I would verify it. Well, for me, if I wanted to really verify, wow, that S is really bad, even for me. I do have messy writing. At least I write big. That's my redeeming feature. If you're ever unsure of what I wrote, just let me know. But so anyways, if I wanted to verify that sentence, the way I would do it is get the original manuscripts, or at least the earliest manuscripts I could find of whatever it was, whatever ancient text, and look at that. That's how I would verify the sentence. So for me, that's the meaning of the sentence. But take a centurion standing beside Caesar crossing the Rubicon. Presumably, he also believes that Caesar crossed the Rubicon, but his method of verification is turning over and watching Caesar cross the Rubicon. If we assume the verifiability criterion of meaning, me and the centurion believe totally different things, which seems absurd. we both believe Caesar crossed the Rubicon. So that was an early problem that was recognized with the verifiability criterion of meaning. You can have a sentence that means the same thing, but have different methods of verification in different contexts. Another problem that I'll just briefly mention that the book talks about, we'll be talking about this in more detail next class, is the problem of induction, or we could just say for now, of a probability. So the positivists wanted to have a rational reconstruction of science. They wanted to show how scientific theories logically followed from the evidence. But in much of science, it's not like a deduction, like it was with the Socrates example. So all men are mortal, Socrates is a man, therefore Socrates is mortal. So there, the conclusion follows with 100% certainty. If the premises are true, the conclusion has to be true. But what about probabilistic inference, where the evidence doesn't prove the conclusion is true, but just makes it more likely? Can you create inductive or probabilistic logic? And the positivists were very interested in doing this, and that was also a profound failure. There's a whole chapter on the failure, which is chapter 3. So that's going to be for next class, but I just mentioned it now in passing. Okay, we still have time. Before I move on to the next problem, which this relates to someone named Quine. This one is takes more time to explain. But any questions about these problems? Okay. So, to introduce the next problem, what many people argue, and I think is now pretty much taken for granted, is that unlike what the positivists said, it is impossible to test statements in isolation. So, as I've been saying, that they think the meaning of a sentence is the method of its verification, but you can't verify or disconfirm a sentence in isolation. And here's a way of cashing that out. So let's say you have a hypothesis, and let's call it H. And your hypothesis leads to the prediction that you should observe O, whatever it is. So, you know, if Einstein's theory is right, light should curve around the sun. And so then when we look at it, the light should be here rather than here. So the logic would be, if H, if my hypothesis, then O. So if my hypothesis is right, then I should observe this. Actually, I'll give a psychological example. So let's say my hypothesis is anxiety reduces cognitive reflection. So cognitive reflection is the tendency to carefully reflect on something. And I assume you all know what anxiety is. So that's my hypothesis. I want to do my dissertation on this. I want to see if anxiety causes people to be less reflective. Could be true, I just made that up. So I want to test it. And then how do I test this? So what I do is I induce anxiety. I don't know, someone give me an operational way of doing it. How could we induce anxiety in a sample? What's a manipulation to stress people out? Yelling at people? Sure. So you get people in a room and you just have people yelling at them. Okay, sure. So there's the induction, and then I measure cognitive reflection with the cognitive reflection test, or CRT. So it's this measure of how much people reflect on sentences. Or how much it's like the you ever know like the ball and bat question? Like a baseball bat and a ball together cost $1.10. The bat is $1 more than the ball. How much does the ball cost? And the answer that pops into people's heads is 10 cents. But if you think about it more carefully, it's like, oh no, it has to be 5 cents. So that's a measure of cognitive reflection. So that's how I measure it in this experiment. And so my prediction about what I should observe, O, is that, so I have the anxiety group and the control group. And so my prediction is, reduce. So the anxiety group should have low CRT scores, and the control group should have higher CRT scores. So that's what I observe. That's what I will see in my experiment if the hypothesis is right. So the positivists so far are very happy. But here's the problem. The hypothesis, which is this, by itself does not imply O. You have to assume a number of other things in order for this to lead to the prediction. So this is the O. What I should observe is that the anxiety group has lower CRT scores than the control group. In order for the hypothesis to lead to that, I have to assume a number of things. For example, I have to assume that this will actually increase anxiety. So I think it was yelling we said. So you have to assume that yelling at people will cause anxiety. Maybe it won't. Maybe they'll just get pissed off. Maybe they won't be anxious. I have to assume that this actually measures cognitive reflection, which is actually controversial in the literature. And a number of other things. I have to assume that people are paying attention, they're actually trying their best, and that my sample is representative, all kinds of things. So really, it's not if H then O, it's really if H and H2, so we'll call this like H1, and H3, and lots of others. If we assume all these, then O follows. So the idea here is you can only test sentences holistically. You have to assume a lot of background information in order for the prediction to actually follow from the hypothesis. This is a potentially difficult idea, but does this make sense? Any questions about this? So there are different terms for this insight. It's sometimes called the Duhem-Quine thesis, named after two gentlemen, the more important of whom is Quine, Willard Van Orman Quine, or just WVO Quine. It's also sometimes called holism. And what Quine wound up arguing is that our beliefs are kind of like a web. So this, the idea here is that the dots are individual beliefs, and the beliefs that are closer to the middle are the beliefs that you are least likely to give up, or most likely to try to protect from falsification. Whereas the beliefs on the outside are beliefs you derive directly from observation. So you like if there's a red apple here and I go, I believe there's a red apple on the table, that would be like out here. It's what's directly testable. Crucially, this idea led Quine to reject the analytic-synthetic distinction. Or I should say, the spelling of this name is WVO Quine. So remember, the analytic-synthetic distinction is the idea that some things are true by definition, and therefore not open to revision. Like 2 + 2 = 4, that's just true, not open to revision. Statements of logic are also on that side. And then synthetic are statements that are testable, that are empirically testable. And what Quine says is there's not actually a clean distinction. The sentences in the middle are the ones that they thought were analytic, but they're not analytic in the sense that they are not able to be revised. They're only the sentences that we are least likely to revise. So Quine made the radical claim that, in theory, it is possible for us to give up on the truths of logic or other truths like that if there's enough evidence that sort of forces us to change the middle of the web of belief. So one example he gave was actually quantum physics. He thought that it's possible that if quantum physics kind of got crazy enough, we may have to revise things that seem just logically true. For example, that one thing can't be in two places at the same time. Kind of seems like that's just logically true, but some of the effects of quantum mechanics are spooky enough that we may have to give up something like that that seems just obviously or analytically true. Somewhat controversial, we don't have to get into whether or not that's right, but this was a very influential criticism of positivism, that this distinction is not as clean as they thought. And then in fact, sentences that we assume are analytic may actually be revisable in light of the evidence. Any questions on that idea? Okay. Now, to be fair to the positivists, this was to some extent anticipated by some of the other positivists. There's a nice idea from one of the positivists named Neurath. Something's called Neurath's boat, which is when we learn about the world, we are stranded at sea on a boat. So the boat's like our set of beliefs, and we have to fix it while at sea. Get driftwood from the ocean, fix things from the inside, but we can never arrive at a dock to fix it. This was a way of both that idea and Quine's idea are both rejecting what Descartes said. So remember that I said that Descartes thought that you should doubt everything and then try to get down to what you can know for sure, like the thing that you can know with certainty, and use that as your foundation upon which you build. Quine, and to some extent the positivists, said that's not possible, you can't know things with certainty, you have to deal with what you've got and kind of revise it as you go, which I think is a very important idea. Popper will say something similar when we look at him on Friday. Okay. The last, so just a little bit more to do. We might actually finish it all today, which I wasn't necessarily expecting, but that would be good. So we'll definitely get close to finishing positivism today. So I have a little bit more from the book, and then just some things of my own I want to add. So there's a nice picture in the book on page 46 of, we're going to treat it as kind of a model of how science normally is thought to work, and then talk about an issue related to it. So another kind of spatial metaphor, there's like the soil. So the soil here is like what you observe. So the soil is things you directly observe. And if some of those things are similar enough, we group them into a category, so maybe like, I don't know, like apples or something, or wavelengths of light, or different, well, that might not count. Trees, rabbits, whatever. Things that we can observe, we may group into one category. And I'm going to simplify the picture in the book a little bit. So, trees, apples, whatever, different categories that unite different things that we observe. And then we have theories about how these things are related, so how they, so you may say like, all swans are white, so we have like white things, swans as categories, and we say all swans are white. And we have different theories about how things that we observe are related. But we also have theories that have to do with things that are unobservable, So for example, take light coming from the sun. So we can see light shining. That would be something that's observable. But we have theories about what goes on inside the sun, having to do with nuclear fusion. You can't directly observe nuclear fusion, you can't go inside the sun, but we have some theory about what's going on inside the sun. So that's an example of fusion. And this is somewhat review, but it's at the end of the chapter. It's everything above here that the positivists reject. It's okay to talk about patterns in what you can observe, but once you cross the line into talking about things you can't observe, you shouldn't be doing that. And one issue that the chapter concludes with that will be relevant to what we talk about when we talk about scientific realism is the theoretician's dilemma. I'm not going to comment on whether this is right or wrong. It's really going to be more relevant to the scientific realism chapter. But I'll at least flag it as a possible issue. So here's the dilemma. Think about things that are in here, theoretical entities that are not directly observable, nuclear fusion or whatever. There's two possibilities. Either they help us make predictions about patterns in observation, or they don't. So I'll say it again. So either the theoretical entities help us predict patterns in observation, or they don't. Those are the only two possibilities. If they do help us predict patterns in observations, well then we can just ignore them. Because you could just forget about fusion and just focus on the patterns you see in sunlight and just talk about those. So we know that sunlight comes to us in such and such a pattern. We can make predictions on that basis. It doesn't really matter if fusion's going on inside the sun or not. As long as we can correctly predict what happens, it doesn't really matter whether there really is fusion or not. So if it does help us predict, we can dispense with it or not worry about whether it's real and just deal with with making the predictions. And if it doesn't help us make predictions, then we can definitely dispense with it, because then it's of no use to science. So that's the idea. Either it helps with making predictions, in which case we can dispense with it and just focus on the patterns in observation, or it doesn't help us make predictions, and then we should dispense with it as well. So, I mean, I have different thoughts on that, but I'll save those for when we talk about scientific realism in a later chapter. I guess all I will say is, and maybe this is the last thing I'll say from the chapter, one objection you could make to that argument, and to positivism more generally, is it doesn't make sense of how science is actually practiced. In practice, science in fact does involve postulating unobservable entities. I won't develop that further now, but that's one objection you could make. Okay, so I have a few final things to say about positivism, but any questions about the stuff I've covered from the book? Actually, there's another video I was going to show. I'll just quote it because it's quite funny. So A.J. Ayer, who I think I mentioned at some point, he was doing this interview with someone describing positivism, and he described it and tried to defend it to the best of his ability. And the interviewer said, "Well, what do you think the main problems with the movement were?" And he said, "The main problem is that nearly all of it was false," which is quite funny. But he goes on to say in the video that even though it did fall out of favor and a lot of the core ideas were false, he said, "I still think we should think that it's true in spirit in a way." And what I would take away from positivism is it's good to have a good dose of it. Right? It's a good reality check. As I heard someone else say, it gives you immunity from doing bullshit. If you kind of temporarily just think like a positivist, like what would a positivist say to this? It's a good way to keep you in touch with observation. Because obviously, even though the strict version of positivism that I've talked about is very problematic, certainly scientific theories have to have some connection to observation. I mean, that's like obviously true. And so thinking like a positivist can help you to get rid of maybe some useless theorizing that has like no connection to observation. But I will conclude with a little teaser. This will be the last thing I say for today. So next class on Friday, we'll be talking about Karl Popper. Who thought that science was all about disconfirming or falsifying theories. And here's one reason for that. So take my if H, then O. Okay, so like I was saying earlier, if the hypothesis is right, then we should observe this. So if anxiety reduces cognitive reflection, then we should observe people in the anxiety condition having lower CRT scores. Okay, let's say we do the experiment and we do see O. We do see what we predicted. Well, if you're a verificationist, if you think the idea is to prove theories right, well then you'd want to say, conclusion, therefore H. If the hypothesis is true, then we should observe this. We did observe this, therefore the hypothesis is true. As I will say next class, this is logically invalid. In fact, if you follow the rules of deductive logic, H does not follow from these two premises. They do not prove it. I won't explain why now, we'll talk about that next class. On the other hand, this is valid. If the hypothesis is true, then we should observe this. We did not observe that, so the anxiety group did not have lower CRT scores, therefore the hypothesis is false. For reasons that I'll explain next class, it is logically possible to falsify a hypothesis in this way, but it is not logically possible to verify it in this way. So there's a little teaser, so that's what we'll talk about next time. So for next class, have a look at chapters 3 and 4, at least enough to be ready for quiz 1. So next class at the beginning, you'll all get quiz 1, 5 true or false questions. They're already on e-class. And you don't have to, but I would recommend start to take some notes for the Popper paper. Start to at least take some bullet point notes about what he thought. Okay, any last questions? All right, I will see you all on Friday.